In this video, you will learn to compare fractions by using number sense and compare fractions by renaming with a common denominator. So beginning with number sense. There are 4 different approaches in which we can compare by using number sense. So method 1 is by looking at same size parts. For example, if we had 5/6 and 4/6. Notice both of these are something over 6. Alright, so the question is which one is bigger? Well, if we have 5/6, so 5 of these 6 versus 4 of these 6, the 5 is bigger, right? So 5 over 6 is bigger because there are more parts to it. There's more 6. And we could draw this out if we wanted to and compare which one is bigger. So if you were to draw this out with 6, for the first fraction we would have 5/6, so 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5. So we have 5/6 versus 4 of them. Notice 5 is going to be more of this entire circle. So 5/6 is bigger, and we can use an inequality symbol where it looks like this, where this inequality symbol has the mouth facing the larger number. Okay, method 2 is using same number of parts. So for example, if we had 6/8 versus 6/7. Now for this one, we need to realize that 8s would be smaller than 7s. If we separated something into 8 parts versus separating that same thing into 7 parts, if there are 8 parts, those parts are going to be smaller than the parts when you split it into 7 parts. So here, if you have 6/8 versus 6/7, 6/7 is going to be larger because 7ths are larger than 8s, and there's the same number of each. So there's 6 of these 8s and 6 of these 7ths, and so therefore, because the 7s are bigger, 6/7 is bigger than 6/8. So we can use this inequality symbol where the mouth is facing the 6 over 7 because 6 over 7 is bigger. So the mouth, is facing the larger number. Okay? And this could be stated as 6/8 is less than 6/7. So this is your less than symbol. So 6/8 is smaller than 6/7. Okay, method 3 is comparing a number greater or less than 1/2. For example, if we had 7 over 11 and 4 over 9, and we are to compare these fractions. Now notice 7 over 11. This number is going to be greater than 1/2. We know it's greater than 1/2 because for this number to be exactly 1/2, you need half of 11 on the top, which is 5.5. So if this were 5.5 on the top of the fraction, that is exactly 1/2 of 11. Now 7 over 11, that's bigger than 1/2. Looking over here at 4/9, 4/9 is smaller than 1/2 because half of 9 is 4.5 or 4.5. So if the numerator had 4.5, that would be exactly half. Well, 4 is less than half, less than 4.5. So 4/9 is less than half, 7/11 is greater than 1/2. So we can tell that 7/11 must be bigger than 4/9. So we can use the greater than symbol, and that would look like this. 7/11 is greater than 4/9. And the fourth method is by comparing the closeness to 1/2 or 1. We can see which number is closer to one of those. So here we have 8/9 and we have 10/11. Again, when we see these fractions, we need to realize that 9ths is going to be it's going to be bigger than 11ths. Okay, if you split something into 9ths, each piece is going to be bigger than if you split it into 11 parts. Okay, the more parts you split it into, the smaller each piece is going to be. Alright, so notice for the first fraction, we have 8 over 9. 8 is one number away from 9 from the denominator. So we have one piece short of one whole. All right, so we're one piece short. That piece that's missing is bigger than the one piece that's missing over here in this fraction, 10 over 11. Right, 10 over 11, we need one more 11th to get one whole, but that one piece or one part that is missing is smaller than this part that's missing. So that means the part that's missing is smaller. That means it's closer to 1 than 8/9. So 10/11 is closer to 1 than 8 over 9, which means 10 over 11 is bigger. So 10/11 is bigger than 8 over 9. So our inequality would be this symbol, and this could be stated as 8/9 is less than 10 over 11. All right, so these are kind of some shortcuts to determine which fraction is bigger. Now there's a method in which we could compare fractions by converting the two fractions to have a common denominator. And we'll do that here in a moment. Before we do that, let's get some practice with comparing fractions. So using number sense, let's see if we can figure out which fractions are bigger. All right, so here, see if you can do these on your own. And if you need to pause the video, feel free to do that. And in this one, we have 3/8 and 5/9. The question is, which fraction is bigger than the other fraction? Well, this one, we can realize that 3/8 is less than 1/2. Right? 4/8 is 1/2. 3/8 is less than 1/2. So this number is less than 1/2, whereas 5/9 is bigger than 1/2. So because of that, 5/9 is bigger than 3/8, or we could say 3/8 is less than 5/9. So this is using method 3, which we compare or see which numbers are greater or less than 1/2. Next we have 7/8 and 7/9. So we have the same number of parts, right? 7 over 8 and 7 over 9. The same number of parts, but the parts we have are different. So the first fraction we have 8s, second fraction we have 9s. Well, realize that 8s, if we split something into 8s, each piece is going to be bigger than when you separate that something into 9s. So each piece for 8s is bigger than each piece for the 9s, but we have the same number of pieces. So we have the same number of pieces, but the 8s are bigger pieces. So 7/8 would be bigger than 7 over 9. So this would be using method 2, which are looking at the same number of parts. Next we have 12/13 and 11/12. Now for this one, we are trying to see which number is closer to 1. They're both really close to 1, but we need to figure out which one is closer to 1. So to determine that, notice that both fractions are just one part away from one whole. Right? We have 12/13 and 11/12. Each numerator is 1 away from the denominator. So with that being said, the question is which one is closer to 1, and to determine that, realize that 13ths will be smaller pieces than 12ths. So when we're one piece away from one whole for the 13ths, that piece that's missing is smaller than the piece that's missing over here for the 11/12, meaning 12 over 13 will be closer to 1 because it's a smaller number away from 1. So 12/13 would be bigger than 11/12. And that is method 4, looking at the closeness to 1. Now for the last one, we have 4/9 and 5/9. This one has the same denominator, and this one is probably the simplest to compare because we have the same size of pieces. They're both separated into 9ths. Here we have 4/9. This one has 5/9, and 5 is bigger than 4, so 5/9 is bigger than 4/9. Or we can say that 4/9 is less than 5/9. And this would be using method 1, which are looking at same size parts. Okay, now let's take a look at determining which fraction is bigger or smaller by renaming the fraction with a common denominator. So for example, if we had 2/3 and 5/6, these are two different denominators. This one has thirds, this one has 6. But to compare, we can find the least common denominator of 3 and 6, which in other words, we're finding the least common multiple of 3 and 6. So the multiples of 3 would be 3, 3, 6, 9, 12, etc. Multiples of 6 would be 6, 9, not 9, sorry, 6, 12, 18, 24, etc. Now which one is the smallest one in common? Well, notice they both have a 6 in common. So the least common multiple would be 6. So what we do is we rewrite this first fraction 2/3 as something over 6. To determine what goes in the numerator, we see what's happening with the denominators. We see that 3 times 2 would get 6. So 2 times 2 on the numerator would get 4. So that fraction can be written as 4 over 6. So I'm comparing 4, 6 and 5, 6. And 5 is bigger than 4, so 5, 6 is bigger than 4, 6. Or we can say that 4, 6 is less than 5, 6. Here's another example. We have 7/8 and 10/12. So to compare these two fractions, we need, again, a least common denominator. So to do that, we need to find the least common multiple of 8 and 12. So multiples of 8 would be 8, 16, 24, 32, etc. Multiples of 12 would be 12, 24, 36, etc. And notice they both have a multiple of 24 in common. So the least common multiple of 8 and 12 would be 24. So I can rewrite both of these fractions as something over 24. All right, that's what we see right here. We're trying to figure out what this new fraction is going to be for both fractions. All right, so looking at the first one, we have 8 times 3 to get 24. So we do 7 times 3 on the top to get 21. So we have 21 over 24. Second fraction, 12 times 2 is 24. Do the same thing for the numerator. 10 times 2 would get 20. So our fractions are now 21 over 24 and 20 over 24. Well, 21 over 24 is bigger than 20 24ths, so we use a greater than symbol. So what we've shown is that 7/8, that first fraction, is greater than 10 over 12, the second fraction. So this is a technique we can use to always determine which fraction is bigger or smaller. We do that by finding the least common denominator and converting each fraction into a new fraction. Now what if you had mixed numbers? So for example, we had 2 and 5, 6 and 1 and 7/8. Well, this one's pretty obvious because we have 2 and then some fraction. Here we have 1 and some fraction. Well, 2 is clearly bigger than 1, so the first mixed number is bigger than the second mixed number. Sometimes it may not be quite as obvious. Here we have 2 and 5, 6 and 2 and 7/8. So here the whole number is the same. Okay, so what we need to do is compare now the fraction component. So we compare the 5, 6 and the 7/8. So when we compare this, we can use we can find a common denominator, or we can just use our number sense. And either way, when we do this, we're going to find that 7/8 is bigger than 5, 6, because 7/8 is closer to 1 than 5 over 6 is. So because of this, we can conclude that the first fraction, 2 and 5, 6, is less than the second fraction of 2 and 7/8. Now lastly, if we need to compare a mixed number with an improper fraction, such as 23 over 4 and 5 and 4/5. There's two different approaches we could use, but basically what we need to do is convert either both into an improper fraction or convert both into a mixed number. So here we're going to convert this first number, this improper fraction, into a mixed number. That will be our approach for this example. So converting 23 over 4 into a mixed number, we need to divide 23 by 4, When you do that, you get 5. 5 times 4 is 20. The remainder is 3. So we can write that as 5 and 3 over 4. All right, so what we have is 5 and 3/4 for the first fraction and 5 and 4/5 for the second fraction. So again, when we compare these, the 5, the whole number is the same. So we can look at simply the fraction part. So we compare the 3/4 and the 4/5. Now we can use number sense to realize that 4/5 is closer to 1 than 3 over 4. So 3/4 is less than 4/5. So therefore, our first fraction of 5 and 3/4 is less than our second fraction of 5 and 4/5. And that concludes our lesson for today. We will see you next time.